Why people disappear without explanation. Have you ever experienced this? Someone you were talking to regularly suddenly disappears. No explanation, no argument, no goodbye, just silence. And almost immediately, your mind turns inward. You replay conversations. You scan messages. You look for the moment something went wrong. Did I say too much? Did I ask for too much? Was I not enough? But psychology tells a different story. For many people, disappearing isn't a decision. It's a nervous system response, not manipulation, not cruelty, not indifference, overload. In this video, we're going to explore why people disappear without explanation, not morally, but psychologically and neurologically, because when you understand what's happening inside the brain, silence starts to look very different. Chapter 1. Violence feels personal. Humans are wired for connection, so when communication suddenly stops, the brain doesn't stay neutral. It fills the gap. They're ignoring me. They don't care. They found someone better. I messed this up. Silence is painful because it removes certainty. And the brain hates uncertainty. When there's no information, the mind creates a story. And most of the time, that story involves rejection. But here's the key point. Not all silence is intentional. Not all disappearance is a message. Sometimes it's neurological. When someone goes quiet, your brain starts searching for meaning. It scans memory, reviews past interactions, builds explanations. This isn't weakness, it's pattern recognition. Your brain is trying to predict what happens next, so you can protect yourself. But that same survival mechanism can turn silence into proof of rejection, even when it isn't. Chapter 2. The brain haussinglet. The brain can only process so much emotional input at once. When emotions exceed processing capacity, too much intensity, too much pressure, too many demands, the nervous system shifts priorities. Connection is no longer the goal, regulation is. Think of the brain as running on limited energy. It has to decide where that energy goes, thinking, feeling, responding, or simply staying stable. When emotional demand becomes too high, something has to shut down. Often, the first thing to go is so judgment. À tel point, the brain asks, what's the kindest thing to? It asks, what reduces stimulation right now? And very often, the answer is distance. Responses slow, messages stop, silence appears, not to punish, not to manipulate, but to survive overload. That's why someone can seem fine one day and unreachable the next. The change isn't about you, it's about internal capacity hitting its limit. Chapter 3. Explanation feel impossible. One of the most painful questions people ask is this: why couldn't they just explain? Because explanation requires resources. It requires clarity, language, emotional regulation, and the ability to handle another person's reaction. But under overwhelm, those systems go offline. The prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for reasoning, planning, and communication, loses access under stress. What remains is basic self-protection. In that state, forming sentences feels exhausting. Anticipating how your words might land feels overwhelming. Imagining the emotional back and forth of a difficult conversation feels impossible. So instead of explaining, the person withdraws, not because they don't care, but because they don't have the capacity to communicate. Silence becomes the simplest response. And from the inside, It can feel like the only response. That's why you might receive a message days or weeks later saying, "I'm sorry I disappeared," but still no explanation. Even in hindsight, accessing and articulating what happened can feel like too much. Chapitre 4. Distance Sagarurial. From the outside, distance looks cold, but internally, it serves a function. Distance reduces stimulation. Distance lowers emotional demand. Distance gives the nervous system room to reset. Think of a phone that overheats. You close background apps, not because the phone is broken, but because it's protecting itself. Emotional withdrawal can work the same way, not strategic, not calculated. Automatic. This is especially common in people who feel emotions intensely, have a history of conflict or emotional burnout. Learned early that expression led to escalation. For some people, connection has always carried risk. Maybe vulnerability led to criticism. Maybe closeness led to pain. Over time, the nervous system learns distance equals safety. So when things get intense, withdrawal becomes reflex, not a choice to hurt someone. A survival pattern that activates before conscious thought. Chapitre 5. Vedhead, the person behind. Understanding the psychology doesn't erase the pain. Because for the person left behind, disappearance triggers their own nervous system response. Anxiety, hypervigilance, self-doubt, the silence becomes loud. You check your phone again and again. You replay the last conversation. Looking for the moment. Everything changed. You wonder whether reaching out will help or make things worse. Your nervous system is also trying to regulate, but in the opposite direction. One person withdraws to calm themselves. The other activates, seeking clarity. This creates a painful asymmetry. Both are reacting, just differently, and that's why disappearance feels so destabilizing. Not because it proves rejection, but because it removes emotional ground beneath you. Uncertainty activates the same brain systems as physical threat. Your body doesn't distinguish between, "I don't know if they're coming back," and "I don't know if I'm safe." Both feel like danger. If you're listening to this and nodding, your reaction makes sense. Reframing disappearance. So what does this reframe change? It doesn't excuse hurtful behavior. It doesn't mean silence is harmless, and it doesn't mean you have to accept it. But it removes one thing: shame. Disappearing isn't always a choice. Sometimes it's survival, and being left behind doesn't mean you were unworthy. It means to nervous systems we're operating under different limits. You don't have to keep searching for what you did wrong. You don't have to turn silence into a measure of your value. Sometimes people disappear because they're trying to keep themselves together. And sometimes the kindest thing you can do for them and for yourself is let go without making it mean something about you. You're allowed to feel hurt. You're allowed to set boundaries. You just don't have to carry someone else's nervous system response as proof of your worth. If this perspective resonated with you, save this video and tell me in the comments. Have you ever disappeared or been disappeared on without explanation? Take care of your nervous system, and thanks for being here.